Discussing the legacy of 19th century American art would be incomplete without considering the artist Thomas Sully. Born in England in 1783, Sully came to the United States as a child. He lived in the South before settling in Philadelphia to pursue a career as a painter. Sully was recognized during his lifetime as his generation's foremost American portrait painter, a reputation that has endured through critical examination. In his lifetime, he painted over 2,600 works, of which 2,000 were portraits. The Thomas Sully painting owned by the Columbus Museum is entitled Mrs. Caleb Newbold and Her Son Thomas. The painting was owned by descendants of the original sitters, remaining in the family until its purchase at auction in 1993 by the museum. Research on this painting indicates that the informal portrait depicts Mrs. Caleb Newbold of Philadelphia and her eldest son Thomas at age 3. Sully completed this painting in less than 6 months in 1813 and was paid $200 for the double portrait. Although the painting's condition was considered relatively stable, it has remained a conservation priority for the Columbus Museum since its acquisition. In 1999, a grant from the National Endowment for the Arts provided funding for the conservation of this Thomas Sully painting. This video documents the treatment of the painting from its initial examination to the actual conservation process.
So conservation is really based on 3 different separate disciplines that all come together. And one is art history, the other is studio art, and the third would be chemistry. So as a conservator, I'm trying to bring all those 3 elements together and look at this work of art and try to understand how it was made, what's happened to it, and what we can do to best preserve it at this point in time. I have a number of different ways that I can examine the work of art and try to apply what I know about artist materials, art history, and chemistry of these materials. But the methods that we might examine it might be very straightforward, such as bringing a very good, strong, bright light to the surface of the painting. There are a lot of different kinds and qualities of light, and sunlight and bright light will tell us all sorts of things about the surface, about the colors chosen, about how the artist applied it, what sort of brush he might have been using. What raking light reveals to me about this painting is a number of things, one of which is it exaggerates the surface texture, so I can see more about the way the artist modeled the paint, about the kind of brush strokes that were typical that he would be using and the quality of the paint that he was using. And I also can see the weave of the canvas. Tells me something about the sort of fabric that this painting was painted on. But then it also tells me something about a problem where the paint is delaminating from the surface, a rather serious concern that does need to be addressed. Otherwise, we do risk losing some of the original painting. Now that raking light has helped me to identify some of the problem areas in this painting, what I then will probably want to do is to look more closely, and one of the tools that helps me to do that is this Optivisor, which has a set of magnifying plates here that I can go ahead and put on, and it helps me to bring the magnification into focus so that I can really see more closely into the surface of the painting and what's going on. So what you're looking at now is the same painting being viewed under ultraviolet light. And what's useful to us in conservation about this spectrum, part of the spectrum, is that it shows the differences in materials. The entire painting has been covered with a natural resin varnish, probably made of a damar resin, a tree sap substance. And as that material ages, it develops the ability to absorb ultraviolet light and then give it off again as sort of a glowing greenish light. Now, something that helps us understand the history of the painting, when we look more closely, such as the area right here adjacent to her wrist, what's happened is we're not getting that greenish, bluish fluorescence that you can see because that area has been changed, and either somebody's removed the varnish or they've restored that area. They've applied additional paint. So something else that also can be determined by examining a painting under ultraviolet light is different kinds of changes that might have occurred not only in the artist's creation of the work or sometime later. And that would include the fact that this painting has been changed. Its outer dimensions are not as they originally were. What we can see is that that's where there's a seam of the original canvas and the additional canvas, and this is where the two were butted together. And under ultraviolet light, we can see not only the seam, but the retouchings that have been done previously by other conservators to camouflage that seam, if you will. So at this point in time, we're interpreting this that the original painting was smaller and then was extended, say, 5 or 6 inches along that edge and given a broader curve along the top. So in the course of examination, we've done a number of tests using various solvents to understand what will remove this aged natural resin varnish that's currently on the surface. The reason we want to remove that varnish is because it's yellowed and distorting the artist's original intention. So we're hoping that after removing this yellow varnish that we can reveal an awful lot more of the original colors and effect that the artist was striving to achieve. So what we've done is taken small cotton swabs with various solvents and applied them to the surface, watching them carefully under the microscope to make sure that as they do dissolve the varnish layer, that they don't affect the underlying original paint layer. What's great about ultraviolet light is it allows us to see that this, although under normal light, matches the color of her dress. When we remove the varnish layer and look at it under UV, we can see that that's a different paint. It's a paint that was done not by the artist, by a restorer later on, trying to camouflage the wear and tear of time. There is a particular problem in the condition of this painting that we need to sort out and address at this point in time, and that's having something to do probably with the artist's original technique and his choice of materials. In general, the painting is in quite good condition, but just in the area of the sitter's hair, we seem to be having a delamination of the varnish on the surface. And I think what that's indicating to us is that the paint layers underneath were either drying too quickly or too slowly, and materials that were applied later are having a hard time accommodating the difference in the shrinkage and contraction of those underlying layers. The real challenge in cleaning a painting is to begin to understand the solubility of the varnish coating on the surface or a dirt layer on top of that varnish. How to remove that without affecting the underlying painting. So I have some solvent in my swab now. I'm going to gently apply it to the surface of the painting. And what I want to do is look for the yellow color of the varnish coming up onto my swab, and yet carefully watching the surface of the paint, make sure that I'm not having anything happen there that I don't want to have happen. So what I've got here is I'm examining my swab and making sure that what I'm seeing is just yellow varnish color and not the color of paint. So we did a fairly extensive battery of tests to understand what we could use to dissolve those layers of restoration, but that would still not damage the original paint layers that lie underneath them. So we have an awful lot of solvents that we can choose from. We can blend those solvents in various proportions. And that was our starting point. We found the right combination of solvents that we felt worked. So we discovered that there are at least 3 layers on the painting on top of the original paint layer. But what I can see here when I'm looking at the layers that we've gone through, this is again the yellow varnish layer. This layer has been removed here, but then this is yet another layer of paint that is not the artist's original paint. Right here, we've actually finally gotten down to that level that is the artist Sully's painting of the skin. This is a solvent gel that is a base of a carbopol acrylic polymer, and we've added both ethanol and xylene to this gel, so that that's the active ingredient. Those are the solvents that are actually doing the work. So now I have my cotton swab with the ethanol xylene gel that I'm going to use to remove the top layers of varnish. The gelling the solvent also allows me to go down in steps. It doesn't just go through and remove everything all at once. I'm going to go down through this top yellow layer and then through this retouch layer before I get to the actual paint layer. And already I can see it starting to cut into and break up that yellowed varnish coating. Occasionally, instead of using a cotton swab for the initial application of solvent gel, we'll use a brush, and we can paint on the solvent gel just exactly where we want it, and sort of gently agitate the surface, but with a very soft tool like a sable brush. This already makes a very dramatic change in the appearance of the painting, but there's still another level of change that's possible, and it's a bit more difficult to see because the orange is so disfiguring, but there's another layer of retouching, previous restoration underneath this yellow layer here. And then it's also very imperative that after I have used that solvent gel on the surface that I remove every trace of it when I'm done. So I'm doing a rinse stage now to get up all the varnish that I can, but then I'll also follow in with several subsequent rinses of solvent to make sure that I've removed all traces of my solvent gel from the surface. If we left that behind, it itself could cause damage to the artwork. But then the final step might end up being a mechanical removal, where we actually take a tool, a piece of bamboo skewer, or a bit of Teflon, and use that to mechanically pick off the gelled restoration layer from the surface. So that I can monitor it more closely, I'll go ahead and put on the Optivisor. And in this case, I'm going to go ahead and use this bamboo skewer. Get in close, following the brush strokes the artist put on. I can actually see a synthetic gummy material coming up off the surface. And it's very different in quality than the artist's original paint film underneath. So you can possibly just pick up this gummy layer here. And I'm going to break it up, and then I'll pick it up onto a swab after I've broken its attachment from the surface. Fortunately, having a surgical microscope allows us to look in the kind of magnification that we can very finely discern the difference between the artist's brush strokes and the way that they go across the surface, and then this very thick gummy layer of a synthetic resin material that lies on top of the artist's paint. So a microscope allows me to look at this and see that this is a translucent layer with no pigment particles in it. It's a synthetic material, and it's definitely not anything the artist put on himself. So where we're at in the phase of the restoration of this painting is that we've spent about 15, close to 20 hours doing the tests, the examination, and now the varnish removal step, so that we pretty much have a clear understanding of what the artist's original paint layer is, how many layers lie on top of that, previous restoration layers, and also areas of retouch that were done in another campaign. A painting of this age may have been restored quite a few times.
Conservation is a regular responsibility of museums. Here at the Columbus Museum, such efforts are undertaken each year. In total, almost 100 hours were spent conserving this painting. These efforts have stabilized the painting, which will allow it to be enjoyed by future generations of museum visitors.